Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Autism Training and Technical Assistance Project webinar. My name is Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I will be your moderator and technical support for today's session. Today's topic is empowering the next generation of neurodiverse self-advocates, and we are joined by our presenter, Haley Moss. This is her second session with us for the Autism Training and Technical Assistance Project webinars, and we are so happy to welcome her back. We are going to do a couple of housekeeping things before we get started with Haley's presentation today. So Haley, you can go to the next slide. Just a couple of reminders. As a reminder, all participants on this webinar are in listen-only mode, and you cannot unmute yourselves. If you have questions as the webinar proceeds, please post those in the chat or in the Q&A, and we will address those at the end of the webinar during our live discussion. And then a reminder that this is being recorded, and the recording from today and materials, the slide deck presented today will be available on our Autism Training and Technical Assistance Project website, and I will put that link in the chat momentarily. And that recording will be available within 48 hours, so you can access that there. We do have the slide deck available for you today. And so I will put the link to that website and the slide deck in the chat momentarily if you would like to follow along with Haley's presentation today. And then in an effort to be as accessible as possible, this webinar is offering closed captioning. You should see it at the bottom of your screen. Please reach out to me if you do not, as well as the recorded session will encompass closed captioning, fully transcribed as well. And then at the end of the webinar and tomorrow, each attendee will receive a link to a survey. Tomorrow, you will receive it in a follow-up email asking you about today's webinar, and we appreciate just 5 minutes of your workday to provide us with feedback and suggestions to help improve or any ideas or any content that you would like to see in any upcoming ATTA webinars. And then a reminder, if you do have faulty internet connection, or if you would prefer to call in this morning, you can do so by using the phone number in your original registration email, and I will put that phone number in the chat momentarily. So briefly, just to touch on what the ATTA project is. So the Autism Training and Technical Assistance Project develops and presents resources that assist individuals with autism in their transition from secondary education to post-secondary education or to employment. And ATTA provides training and support to important stakeholders as they work to provide an equitable experience for individuals on the spectrum. Next slide, please, Haley. And then a little bit about our center. So the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support, that is who I work for. And I'm joined today by our director, Amy Julian, and potentially my colleague, Brittany Boston, will be on with us as well. But you can feel free to reach out to any of us via the chat if you have any questions about our center. We provide technical assistance and we develop publications and resources to improve strategies for all of our partners. We work primarily in college transition, recruitment and retention and completion. And we have been around for since 1977, and we are housed at Illinois State University in Bloomington Normal. So you can browse. I'll put our website in the chat as well if you'd like to browse any of our resources along with the ATTA project. Next slide, please, Haley. And so this is the link to our autismcollegeandcareer.com. That's the link to our ATTA project website. Again, I will put that in the chat as well, so you'll have access during the whole entire session if you would like to browse that. And then we are going to do some polls here. Next slide, please, Haley. So I'm going to put these up now. Both polls should be up, so you should be able to answer both of them at the same time. But our first poll is, which region are you located in? So just where are you joining us from this morning? I am joining you from Central Illinois. Our center is located in Bloomington Normal in McLean County, and I'm actually working from home today, so I'm joining you from Macon County in Decatur, Illinois. And so we would just like to know which region of the state are you joining us from today? And then our second poll, if you want to go to the next slide, Haley, which that one is up as well, is just which stakeholder do you best represent? So which ATTA stakeholder do you best represent? Are you a student or young adult? Are you just, I think we're all community members, so you can actually choose all that apply. Are you a family member, an employer? What's your stakeholder that you best fall into today. So we'll give everyone a couple more seconds to answer this poll. And then our director, Amy, has put the Autism College and Career website in the chat for everyone if you'd like to access that. And I'll put the direct link to the slides momentarily. So we have over 80% of you who have answered the poll, so I'll share the results and we can just debrief here. Most of you are joining us from Chicago or Northeast area. Maybe you're in the suburbs, so welcome, and everyone else is sprinkled across the state. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And most of you are secondary or post-secondary educators with us this morning, a couple community members and family members and employers as well. So thank you so much for answering those polls. They're great for our analytical purposes, and we greatly appreciate it. And then with that, I'm going to hand it off to Haley Moss. This is just my title slide, so you can skip that, Haley. You've already introduced me a little bit. And I'll hand it off to Haley Moss to introduce herself.
Thank you so much for having me today, and it's a pleasure to get to join all of you again. It was wonderful getting to meet some of you, or most of you perhaps, back in July, and it's wonderful to get to be with you again. So for those of you who do or do not know me, my name is Haley Moss. My pronouns are she, her. I am from Miami, Florida, and I get to join you from here today. It is not exactly the best weather. It's hot and rainy, which is like the worst combination of everything. And I am an autistic self-advocate. I am an attorney. I am an author, and I'm just very passionate about neurodiversity and making sure that all people on the spectrum feel included and welcomed in our own conversation and everything that we do here in the community, no matter whether that's at work, school, or activities, or anything that people who are autistic want to do that they can do given the right support, and that we have community stakeholders, parents, professionals, teachers, everybody else is there to support us and is able to do what they can in their power to help us. So today's topic is especially relevant to this conversation. So we're talking about self-advocacy and how we can empower people and how we can best help people. And of course, here's some of my contact information. I am painfully slow at emails because my inbox is a black hole. So if you have emailed me or want to email me, please don't be afraid to follow up, and please don't get mad at me if I am very bad at responding, because I know this is something that I struggle a lot with. So you can always say hello to me on social media and follow along if that's easier as well. I try to be accessible, but I also try to set boundaries as best I can, and I want to be able to help as many of you as I humanly can. So before we get started, I wanted to kind of build a little bit more on what Kirsten was saying about accessibility. Accessibility is something that's not just important to the folks here at ATTA, but it's something that means a lot to me as well. And when we talk about accessibility, it's really important to understand that no one person or organization has the power to grant or gatekeep access. Access is something that we do together. So each of us has our own individual access needs. So maybe for me right now, that means having a drink of water nearby. For you, that might mean that you need to take a break, that you're using the closed captions that are provided, that you're kind of glad that maybe your camera's not showing and that you're on mute, whatever it may be, or maybe you just need to take a break. So this webinar is being recorded. So if you need to come back to it or you want to rewatch it and skip all the introductory information and accessibility notes, you can do that. And if you're someone who needs to move your hands, you need to stand up. I know, at least for me, I'm usually fidgeting in some way, shape, or form, but in this house, that is totally okay. I know in a lot of professional settings, we're told we can't really move too much. We can't do what we have to do. You must be sitting and paying attention and doing your thing. I trust you. I love you guys. I want everyone to feel welcome and included in this little space that we're creating for the next hour or so that we have together. And of course, copies of slides are available, as you heard earlier. And if you are someone who has a visual impairment or you are blind, that these slides should also be accessible to you. So I make sure that all of my images have alt text to describe what these images are. That even includes the logos that you see from ICSPS and ATTA on their PowerPoint. So I made sure to describe them for everybody as best I can. If you are a screen reader user, you should be able to follow along. And for those of you who don't know what that means, That is a very cool device that allows people with visual impairments or who are blind to access digital content and consume visual content online or on the computer or other technologies so that they feel included and are able to best enjoy the things that a lot of folks who are sighted take for granted. So without further ado, let's get this show on the road and let's have a very wonderful conversation today about self-advocacy. So everything that we're going to talk about in the self-advocacy space is beneficial to everyone. So there's stuff that's geared at autistic self-advocates. There's stuff that's geared at parents and professionals, teachers, employers. So something that's really cool about self-advocacy as a topic, at least to me, is that it's something that all of us can benefit from, whether we're learning those skills or we're teaching those skills or we're giving a safe space to use those skills. So when we talk about what is self-advocacy, that's probably a really great place for us to start this discussion. And you've probably just heard me say that it's a lot of skills, but also when we talk about self-advocacy, it's important to realize that it's a personal and political movement as well. So self-advocacy for people with disabilities has a long and storied history. It's something that for me, I get very geeky about, whether it's the independent living movement, the disability rights movement, all the major moves that we saw when folks came home from wars that we saw in the 60s and 70s after the Civil Rights Act and disability was left out of it, and all sorts of really cool stuff that if you really want to know more disability history, I highly recommend checking out the Netflix documentary Crip Camp. But I am not teaching that today because that would be just me going on a very excited tangent about things I find interesting. But at the end of the day, self-advocacy empowers people to make choices. That is the very bare bones definition of what self-advocacy is all about. And I really liked this quote that I found from, I believe it was the Minnesota Independent Living Movement website at the time. And they wrote that self-advocacy as a personal and political philosophy is a movement primarily of and by people with disabilities who are making their own decisions, speaking for themselves and for others with disabilities, and taking control over their lives. So let's unpack that for a minute, okay? Is that we have people with disabilities who are really in the driver's seat, that are really in control of their lives. They're able to make decisions, big and small, speak up for themselves. And when we talk about speaking up for ourselves, it's not always just verbal, the way that you might hear me talking today. It could be our non-speakers who are using alternative and augmentative communication to communicate. So things like the iPad or letter boards or pointing and behaviors. There's so many different ways to speak for ourselves and also with and for others with disabilities. So a lot of times when I realize that I am an advocate, I do speak from my own experiences, but I'm trying to uplift the voices of other autistic and disabled people alongside with me and to speak to greater issues, especially when we often might go silenced or unheard, and taking control over our lives. So that might, again, go back to making decisions is what is taking control over our lives? Maybe it's pursuing a goal or realizing we have a dream or wanting to do something else with our lives and somehow not making sure that our parents are the ones that are making all the decisions for us. And I know that for a lot of parents of autistic kids, no matter how old we get, you want to be very, very involved. And I absolutely admire that and respect it. But sometimes making sure we are the ones who are ultimately the decision makers is really, really important. And sometimes it's not that you might know better or we don't, but sometimes we do know better, or sometimes we just need to make the mistakes and learn for ourselves. I know as someone in their now late 20s, I am still learning this. There are still times that my parents are right about things and I am wrong, but it helps me to learn just like any other non-disabled or neurotypical peer. So it's really important that we have this learning situation going on no matter what. And when we talk about who are advocates, when we talk about advocacy and self-advocacy, a lot of people get very kind of scared because a lot of folks' idea of advocates are people with a lot of power, that they're people who make decisions that aren't just for themselves. Their idea of advocates are people like me who are lawyers. They think that lawyers, and at the end of the day, lawyers are advocates. We advocate for our clients, right? And also, it's not a job title. So even though we think of politicians advocating for their constituents or lobbyists who are advocating for a specific cause, it's not a job title. That anyone can be an advocate for anything that they feel passionate about for themselves, their own needs, their families, their schools, their workplace, whatever it might be. That there really is no job title here, that we advocate every time we speak to what we want, what we need, and how we're going to get there. So I think demystifying this is one of the really big things that when we talk about self-advocacy, we could do, because so many people get kind of turned off and afraid because they think that advocates are people who have power. And historically, people with disabilities don't have power. Our family members might have more power than we do, but they think that even that is not enough power, because you might not be able to overhaul a government system that might not be working for you, or you might not have enough pull to change something in your school or your district or somewhere else. But then again, advocacy does not mean systemic change. It could lead to systemic change, but it doesn't mean that's the only way to be an advocate. And I think that's a really important thing to clear up as we have this discussion. When we talk about self-advocacy, I think it's really important that we understand that at the end of the day, it's a form of communication. That is what we're doing as self-advocates. We're communicating what we want, what we need, and how we're going to get there. And you can help us with that. As I think that's really, really important when we have these conversations, is that self-advocacy could be really simple as giving or withholding consent, a yes or a no, or it could be really complicated too. So it could be speaking for an entire group of people to lawmakers. And I have had these experiences throughout my life. I have said that I don't want to go to a restaurant with a group of people or my parents, or that I don't want to go to, or that I want pizza for dinner. Or I've gone to the state capitol here in Florida, which is Tallahassee, and I've spoken to our elected representatives about why certain autism and disability programs in our state need more funding and need an increase, and what that means to me as an autistic person and why these groups have benefited me. So when we talk about advocacy, we see that real spectrum of what that might mean. And self-advocacy happens in every single one of those situations. Is that it's a no, I don't want to eat this. And also, here's why my story matters in this great big conversation about the state budget. So I think it's really interesting to see there really is a gamut of experiences, but really learning these skills starts with that basic yes, no. Where are we going from there? Or how do we even say, hey, I want pizza, rather than answering, no, I don't want that? Is how do we kind of get to those places? And I think that's something we're going to try to dive into as much as we can during the time that we have together today. And something that I want to make clear is that anybody can be a self-advocate. Is you don't have to go to a training or a webinar like today if you are a person with a disability, or you are someone who is learning how to speak up for yourself in any situation. Is that we all self-advocate every single day. We all make decisions every single day. So we advocate for ourselves when we say we need another 5 minutes and we're running late and someone needs to be gracious with us. I know that's something that I do fairly regularly. It's like, hey, I might be 5 minutes behind. Please wait for me. It's not just or if I have to say, I don't feel well, can we reschedule? There's so many different ways to advocate for your needs. So advocating by saying, I don't feel well, can we reschedule, is a lot different than just pushing through it because you think that this is what someone else wants. And it's advocacy to say, we need to reschedule because I need to rest. And sometimes that's a really powerful thing that we're able to do. And I know many non-disabled people sometimes reckon with those same decisions. But for you, it might be a lot more assumed that you have these skills right away. People with disabilities need to know how to advocate for ourselves, and we're not always taught how to do that because it's always assumed that one, we're not able to, or two, someone else will do it for us. Think parents, teachers, or other siblings, loved ones, caretakers, etc. So we're also making these constant decisions for ourselves no matter what. This is everybody, right? Is we're making decisions from the minute we wake up to the minute we go to bed. So we're making decisions. What are we going to wear today? That was a decision that I was thinking about earlier this morning. What am I going to have for breakfast? When am I going to get up? Do I have to take a shower? Am I doing this? What time am I leaving the house? We're constantly making decisions. Who am I going to talk to later? I need to text this person. I need to do that. We're making constant decisions. And we're also really speaking up for ourselves and making these decisions no matter where we are. So of course, recently, like many of us, I still work from home. So I am making decisions for myself at home and at work. So I think I have the best of both there. When I was in school, I had to make decisions about whether I would do my homework, whether I would do reading, if I would ask for help from a teacher or professor. And I think we also need to think about the way that we speak up for ourselves and make decisions in friendships and relationships. I usually am not someone who enjoys talking about friendships and relationships because that's a boundary that I set. But I think when we talk about friendships and relationships, it's really important to understand there's a huge self-advocacy component because we are setting boundaries, much like I do when I usually talk about these types of relationships that we have, that we're telling people what we need and what we want or what we want to do. We're making decisions and speaking up all the time. When someone might say something that's offensive or hurting our feelings, we get to make a decision. Are we going to speak up and say something? Or are we just going to let that comment that might be hurtful roll off our backs? That's a decision that I find myself grappling with quite a bit sometimes. Is somebody might say something that's offensive to me or other disabled people. And if there's someone that I'm friends with or whatnot, I have to think in almost a split second, am I going to say that this is harmful? Am I going to call them in to learn to do better? Or am I just going to sit there and take it? And that's a decision. And then when I say, hey, you shouldn't use that word, that's a decision to speak up. And it's not just speaking up for myself that something is harmful, but also explaining and speaking up on behalf of others why that might be harmful. So also when we self-advocate for our own interests and also on behalf of others, we're really just using our voices to get what we need to succeed. So whether that means at school that we're getting extra time on a test, additional support, a food that we want to eat, we're able to get accommodations at work, or our friends and partners know how to treat us properly, all of that is things that we need to succeed. Is we're telling people how to treat us, how to work with us, and how to support us. That's really what self-advocacy is all about and comes down to. And this isn't just limited to people who might be speaking or who might not have intellectual disabilities. This is something that's for everyone and something really interesting. If you're interested in, again, in history and self-advocacy movements, that a lot of this really does begin with people who have intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities. So whenever we say that who is left out of these conversations or are they capable of something like self-advocacy, the answer is always yes. Yes, everybody can do this and anyone can do it and everybody should be a self-advocate. I also like to talk about self-advocacy on a larger scale. So I wanted to introduce you to people who are self-advocates who end up becoming public policy advocates and activists. So I wanted to share the story of Kayla McKeon, who was the first registered lobbyist with Down syndrome, and she represented the National Down Syndrome Society. It was very awesome to see. Lawmakers absolutely loved her. And I also wanted to introduce you to a friend of mine named Connor Cummings. Connor is from Virginia. He's the one wearing the Mickey ears that you see. And alongside his mom, Sharon, the two of them worked to get laws passed in Virginia that allowed him to continue to receive support from his parents once he hit adulthood. And I thought that was so powerful to see. And the two of them are very, very involved together in the disability policy space. And I think that was something that I wanted to share because what makes Connor so awesome is, yes, he's really using his voice to affect that change because it started from his personal story, but his mom is his greatest ally. Is that when he doesn't have the words, his mom goes up to bat for him and with him. And at the same time, Connor is still in control of what gets said, what gets posted, how things are going. But mom is an awesome ally and support there and make sure that Connor's able to self-advocate for himself and that together they're able to advocate for others. So I always think that when we have these discussions, we think of people who end up with this power as well, so to speak, that it's usually non-disabled allies. And I think showing that, yes, those of us who are neurodivergent or who do have disabilities, we are very capable of being those larger scale self-advocates as well, whether it's in the public sphere or privately as well. And again, that's something that I really admire. And both these folks have done a lot of good for our community. And I think when we talk about advocating for ourselves and autistic identity and disability identity, it's really important to have role models as well. So it is always an honor to get to introduce my friends and colleagues and people that I just admire, because that way we're able to meet more people. And for our young folks who feel that they are alone learning these skills, or who feel that they are alone in that they're the only autistic person ever, because that was a feeling that I've once experienced as a teenager, that having role models or knowing that there are people that are out there doing the thing is a very powerful experience. And it's a good little nugget of knowledge for them to have. And that always brings people asking me, but I'm not going into policy. I shouldn't care. Why is this important? Because I will show you, my friends, and you'll think this is just for people who want to do policy. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And again, this goes back to that no matter how many support needs somebody has, so whether someone is speaking, non-speaking, requires daily assistance from a caregiver or a parent or a family member or whoever it may be, all people on the spectrum deserve to be heard. They deserve to have a way to communicate, to be able to make decisions and feel powerful in everyday life. Every single person deserves that human dignity, that human right to self-determination, every single one of us. That impairment doesn't dictate whether or not someone deserves these rights. And we can have a whole deeper discussion about what that means and what rights somebody really has. But again, we're not really talking about policy, and we're not going into policy today. But what really comes down to the wire at the end of the day is that everyone deserves to have skills that make them feel heard, empowered, and maintain a level of independence. And we're going to talk about this idea of independence a little bit more as we go, but independence does not mean necessarily that you have to live on your own, you have to have a job, you have to do everything by yourself, that you have to have a level of independence. So maybe that's even being able to make a snack or be able to choose what snack you want. So everybody's coming from a very different place based on the level of needs and goals that they have, but we need to make sure that everybody has some skills to make sure that they're being heard and that they are able to do whatever that they're able to do. So I want to kind of shift gears a little bit about how can we make this tradition of encouraging self-advocacy now that we know what exactly it means and what it is. So I always think of it as making a tradition, because school honestly isn't the place where I learned how to self-advocate. Is that it wasn't a teacher who told me go stand up to a bully or something like that. Self-advocacy is something I learned began at home. It began with my parents, it began with my family, and then I was able to start translating it across the board into other situations as I eventually got older as well. So when we talk about where this begins, I really want to reiterate that self-advocacy begins at home. It encourages decision-making, and no form of self-advocacy is too small. So again, that brings us back to what exactly is the smallest micro level of self-advocacy when we talk about decision-making. And honestly, that's yes or no questions. Do you want to go to the park? Do you want chicken fingers later? Do you want this? Or even just getting, instead of just asking those prompting questions, shifting to, I really want to go to the park. I want to play with my friends. I want to play Super Mario. I want to do something, or maybe we want to eat pizza for lunch or something. I don't know. I know I keep mentioning food. It's because food is always on my mind too, because I swear every time we do webinars, they usually run into lunchtime because I'm an hour ahead of everybody. So usually that's the last thing that I'm thinking of, or when I'm starting to think about like my life. So I apologize if me relating self-advocacy with food is something that happens a lot in here, because that's something that I've been noticing. So thank you for bearing with me. But yes, all of this begins at home, and we're encouraging decision making, especially when someone tells us what they want and need, and we honor those requests. And also when we talk about self-advocacy as it relates to the person's disability, that's really important, is knowing when to say, this situation's really overwhelming. That maybe a young person might not know how to say that they're having a sensory overload, but they might know how to say, this is too much, or my stomach hurts, which might be a way of saying, I'm very anxious and we need to go. So we have to understand that everybody communicates differently, and that we're encouraging this standing up for ourselves in some way, shape, or form. And that honestly begins with having a supportive home environment. I am super grateful that my parents always encouraged self-advocacy, that they always kind of prompted me to use my words to speak up as best I can. And of course, that always evolved as I got older, because I was not super social. I was a pretty shy kid. And as I got older and I realized that I couldn't have as much support because I turned 18, I was living away for college, all of that stuff, I realized a lot of it really did fall on me to use those skills that I learned at home in order to advocate for myself in every other aspect of my life. So we should be encouraging self-advocacy at home and everywhere else, even if you're autistic and you might not live independently. You might not speak with your mouth. You might be using AAC like we talked about earlier, or you might be communicating just with behavior. If you don't drive, so I do drive, I'm just a very nervous driver. I honestly just don't drive a lot because the anxiety is really bad for me. And if you might not go to college, you might just go straight to a job. You might go to a transitional program. You might be working with a job coach or voc rehab or whatever programming instead of going to a post-secondary institution. It doesn't matter. That your choices and your preferences still matter no matter what. And I think it's really important that our family members and teachers and other professionals recognize this, that you don't have to be this sparkling example of success and following that yellow brick road of what we think young adulthood really is in order to be heard. So I think we have this idea of that only people who are quote unquote high functioning. Sidebar is that I absolutely loathe that term. I think we talked about it a little bit last time as well, but if you fall into that category, you are not the only ones who should be learning self-advocacy or who should be encouraged to develop this skill set. It really is for everyone, even if you don't eventually do these things, or that living on your own or driving or going to college, if that's not part of your plan or your goals, it doesn't mean you can't be a really effective self-advocate. And that kind of comes back to this idea of, but my child might not be independent. And I told you that we would kind of deconstruct this idea of independence a little bit, of this idea of independence versus interdependence. So something that happens a lot, at least when it comes to disability services and providers and professionals, is we always say that independence is a goal. And to that, I have said this, and I actually have a book coming out in November about the transition to adulthood and independent survival. And the first thing that I say is, what does independence even mean? There is no such thing as someone who is completely independent. And in disability services, we hold independence as this very lofty, giant goal. And it sends this message that independence means that you must be able to do everything by yourself. And quite honestly, that is completely false. All of us are interdependent. We need help from other people. And sometimes independence means knowing exactly when you need help. So when I say that we're interdependent, I mean that there are things that I know, no matter how hard I try, or whether I'm disabled or non-disabled, I will need somebody else to help me with them. For instance, taxes. I am not that good at stuff like that. I think the forms are complicated. I'm not a math person, contrary to most autism stereotypes. And I know no matter what, my accountant will keep me out of trouble with the IRS much better than I could do on my own. So I am interdependent and know when the forms come, I should probably call for help and hire him for the year. I also know that things like buying a car, maybe I'm going to take my dad because he's a better negotiator than me. Or maybe I don't know what to do, or I don't know how to fix it when my air conditioner breaks, which is like the most tragic thing that can happen to you in Florida, by the way, is that your AC breaks in the middle of the summer, and putting me to try to fix it and figure out what's going on there is a bad idea. And sometimes independence means knowing when to call the AC repair guys to come out and take a look at it, and then spend the day hoping that I don't need a completely new unit. So I think when we talk about interdependence versus independence, that we're really knowing that we all rely on other people. Otherwise, most of us probably wouldn't have jobs or some kind of role that we play in society. And also that we can't do everything by ourselves. If we were to do everything by ourselves, that we don't need other people, we're kind of destined to fail. And that's extremely true for neurodivergent and disabled people, that we do need help with certain things. Maybe we do need that job coach. Maybe we do need to live with a roommate or a support person or our parents, because that helps us. That's not a bad thing. So when we talk about independence, again, we're kind of really, I know that's kind of meta and a little bit of a tangent, but a lot of the big opposition to teaching self-advocacy often comes down to this myth of independence. And teaching these skills at home is still super, super important, that it instills confidence in people no matter what their needs. And a lot of us struggle with confidence and self-esteem, and giving us the tools to ask for what we need to make our own choices and to do that builds confidence and self-esteem. When we're not getting it at school because we might be bullied, or we might not be getting it at work because it might be hard to find a job, or we don't fit in the right way, that building that confidence and self-esteem at home and in the skill set that we have is crucial. And my next thing is, people go, I'm not a parent or a self-advocate. Please excuse my typos. What can I do? So the really great thing is that no matter who you are, you have the ability to encourage self-advocacy in whatever setting you're in. So I think a lot about interventions and therapies. And one of the easiest things you can do, or at least make sure that your clients do, is that you can get them to say that they don't feel comfortable with something. And you know what you do when that happens? You respect those boundaries. That someone is communicating that this is overwhelming, that is too much, that they don't want to work on this behavior, or that they don't want to change this thing about them, or they think that you're asking a question that might be too probing for whatever the reason, or that the whole thing might just be a sensory experience that's a lot. So when somebody is advocating, it's up to you to respect those boundaries and honor those preferences. We don't want to have a learned helplessness where someone just advocates for themselves constantly, especially when it's related to their access needs and disability needs. And someone's just like, yeah, no. So when someone says that something's overwhelming, that we trust them. Maybe we try to adjust the setting if we can. Maybe we turn off the lights. Maybe we get them to a safe place, whatever it might be. When someone says that they feel uncomfortable or that they need a break for whatever the reason. So when I was at work in my last job, I had an office job. I was an associate attorney. I represented hospitals against insurance companies, and I would get really overwhelmed sometimes. It was just a lot of research. It was a lot of writing. It was a lot of learning and going through millions and millions of documents. I'm not even kidding about millions of documents. Every time there was like an email, it counted as a full document. So you could just imagine how much things added up in litigation. And it would just be a lot to take in. And I would just say, I need to take a break. That I'd stop my little billing timer and I would just go outside for 5 minutes. And that was okay. It wasn't the no, you must bill for those extra 5 minutes. Okay. And when we talk about accommodations, there's so many different ways to have these conversations. So usually when I teach workplace and school accommodations, I can basically turn it into an all-day seminar, because there's so much to unpack with the law, or how to have those conversations and how to be a good ally during those conversations. But just for my little example, I'm going to use the soft disclosure of I work best when fill in the blanks. You give me clear instructions. I don't know. And that can be the easiest way to advocate for our needs without having to disclose or something else, is just really filling in those blanks. And in school, we can also encourage all students to be self-advocates, not just students in a special education classroom, and not just students with disabilities. So a few years ago on Twitter, there was a conversation that went around because a teacher had given each student at the beginning of the year a note card. And on the note card, she was like a fourth grade teacher. On the note card, the students had to fill in the blanks of, I wish my teacher knew. And the students all chose something that they thought their teacher should know about them. And the answers that this teacher got surprised her. That she got answers like, I wish my teacher knew that I only have one pencil because my family can barely afford to have food on the table. Or I wish my teacher knew that I'm not trying to be late with my homework, but I'm also taking care of 3 younger siblings. Or I wish my teacher knew that my favorite color was purple because that was the thing that the student thought was the most important. So what really happened in these self-advocacy situations is you had students sharing things that felt very personal, that were relevant to them, that they wish that the teacher knew so that they could best speak up for themselves and have their needs met. So maybe the teacher whose student said that they only had one pencil because they didn't have any money would help make sure that there were pencils freely available in the classroom, for instance, or maybe that they wouldn't be faulted if they forgot to bring a pencil to class. That there were different ways that this teacher was able to accommodate every single learner and every single student. And it really began this conversation when this happened. The story went semi-viral and everybody really jumped in on this trend. And I thought it was really powerful, not just for a group of fourth graders, but for anyone who wanted to be able to advocate for themselves. And of course, what made it powerful to me, at least, is it was done in writing. So every single learner felt like they had a way to communicate. Or if they didn't feel comfortable writing it on a note card, they could have went up to her after class, or they could have typed it out somehow. So there's different ways that we can have this kind of communication and dialogue that benefits all types of minds and all kinds of disabilities and is accommodating to everyone as well. So no matter who you are, there's something that you can be adding to this conversation as a self-advocate's ally. And being an ally and accomplice is sometimes the best thing that you can be. And that's super powerful. And I know professionals often are not in a situation where they feel like they have this type of power, but the truth is you do. And that is very awesome. And please use your powers for good. Which kind of leads me to segue a little bit into how do you even become a good self-advocate? Because a lot of times we teach self-advocacy without actually talking at all about the skill set involved. So let's go back to the basics when you're learning how to be a self-advocate. And for those of you who aren't neurodivergent yourselves, you can use this when you're thinking about how you handle conflict, how you talk to other people, or even thinking about this when thinking about the self-advocates in your life as well. So then you can help them best become advocates as well. So the first step that I always think is identify how you best communicate. Everybody's going to have a different answer here. And it also might be different depending on the situation. So some people are very, very talkative. You might think that's me. But I realize when it comes to things like my feelings or things that are more complicated like that, I do better if I write it out. So I think about even with my friends, I have had more productive self-advocacy conversations about over text than I ever would have had over the phone or in person, because I'm able to organize my thoughts better. I'm able to share how I feel better because I also can illustrate a little bit better with emojis, and I can kind of not worry so much about what is the other person thinking in this moment. And I might need an extra few minutes to write out what I'm thinking, or I might want to go over it, or I might want to ask someone else for some feedback first if I'm not sure. And some people are very gestures when they talk. So some people are like me, they talk with their hands. Some people might point at things, they might shake their head, they might nod their head. Everybody might have a very different way to communicate. And if you're an assistive technology user, how you communicate might look different too. So you might also be a writer or a texter, or you might be using a letterboard or something else entirely. So that's a great first step, is figuring out how is the easiest way for you to communicate with other people. Because that's the thing about self-advocacy. It's communication and it's a conversation. You can't advocate for yourself to yourself unless you're having one of those radically honest, introspective moments where you're realizing something like I do every once in a while. And I'm like, girl, you need to slow down. You are overextending yourself and this is bad. Please take a break. Go take a nap. Go do something else. And sometimes that's the form of advocacy I need for myself, but that's not what I'm trying to teach today and what I'm trying to really get at. But sometimes you might have those moments and you might need to just be honest with yourself. But the next thing you should be doing is really identifying what you need and want. So if you don't know what you want out of life, that's okay. You don't need to have a 5-year plan right now. I know every time I get asked about my 5-year plan, it really freaks me out. But identify what you need and want. And maybe think of this kind of in the moment. Maybe you can think about it in terms of a 5-year plan. Maybe you can think about what you want this weekend. Maybe you can think about what you need right now. So, what are the most important things that you might need? So maybe you need an accommodation. Maybe you need to communicate how you feel. Maybe you don't want someone to keep hurting your feelings. Maybe you want to go out to dinner this weekend, safely, of course. And you might want to make a list of this or kind of keep mental notes of what are the most important things right now, down the line, or somewhere else. And think about how can the people in your life help you and support you to make this happen. So since advocacy is a conversation, you got to think of who and how can someone help you. So maybe the idea to go out to dinner is that maybe you want to go with your friends, or maybe your family goes out every single weekend and this time it's your turn to pick the restaurant. So that might be a way. Or maybe it's, okay, I need an accommodation at school or work. Do I talk to my supervisor? Do I talk to human resources? Do I talk to disability services or a professor or a teacher at school? Who am I supposed to talk to? And also, how do we create access? That's probably a much bigger question that I like to ask, but access is so important. And how do we make sure that you can accessibly have these conversations? So maybe it's in private, maybe it's in a quiet place, maybe you schedule a time to talk to somebody. Whatever you need to do to make this less stressful is something that benefits everybody for that matter. And I think that's a really great place to start. So I actually drew this picture when I was in high school. And I always like to show it when we talk about self-advocacy, because growing up, the phrase that I heard probably every single day as a shy neurodivergent kid who hated asking for things was use your words. And for me, that was always really stressful. And I have a lot of feelings about that in hindsight, because I think forcing speech can be really difficult. And I don't really agree with it. But I think that it's important to know how to talk about something, or how to be able to share what you're thinking and feeling. And for me, that was always something I struggled with. And I've learned now there are many, many different ways to communicate, and that honestly makes my life easier. But this pressure on just using spoken words is going to make people falter and have a harder time than they need to. But at the same time, using words and gestures and things of all sorts can help us do better as advocates as well. And it's really important to realize that if you don't ask for something or let someone know that you're struggling in some way, shape, or form, they're not going to know. We're not mind readers. I wish we were. So something else people always said to me, other than use your words, was ask and you shall receive. And I know that's not always true, because sometimes someone will say no. But if you don't ask, you won't know. And someone also can't read your mind and realize what your needs are. So for me, I actually started learning how to be a self-advocate at a young age. So when I was in school, I went to private schools after about kindergarten. And what happened in private school is we had a meeting every single year with the teacher before school started. So I know it's August, which means probably around this time of year, actually, because school starts pretty early in Florida. I'm pretty sure that the college kids here in Miami are moving into dorms right now, because every time I go past the university, I see a bunch of trucks and a bunch of cars. And I live not too far from there. So I know even with any condo or apartment building here that people just move in all during August. So it's probably back to school time, right? Please correct me if I'm wrong and you're one of those lucky people who doesn't go back to school until after Labor Day. Those are the good old days. But when we'd usually in August, we'd meet with the teachers. And what would happen is we would discuss me, my autism, and my needs. And once I was old enough to realize I was autistic, I was invited to these meetings with the teachers. So there was a point when they would ask me what my goals for the year were. So my parents and my mom and my teachers, they'd kind of brainstorm, powwow, and plan out all these things that they hoped that I would accomplish that school year. And what ends up happening is when I go, is I have different goals than they do. Is they're thinking about maybe bumping up the reading level on the stuff I'm reading, because I'm consuming chapter books like nobody's business. And I'm sitting there and I just say, I would like to make friends with girls this year. That was not part of my plan, but that was something that I wanted, because all of my friends were boys. All of my friends were boys because I played video games and I had an easier time socializing with boys. So 8 or 9 year old me just goes, I want to be friends with girls. And that became part of the plan. I was seated next to the only new girl in the class on the first day of school. And my teacher made kind of an effort to help me befriend her and to be part of some of the other existing friend groups. That was a form of self advocacy that I never forgot, because saying what I needed or wanted and hoped to achieve was taken seriously. And somehow the adults in my life were going to help me get there. So you can use these things in school, independent living. So even realizing you need help, or at work when you need accommodations, relationships, and friendships, and beyond. And I think that's so powerful. And even just being able to tell partners in the past that they've said or done something that hurt my feelings or made me feel uncomfortable was a skill that took a while to develop, but it's been super helpful. And honestly, especially when they are relationships with other people and not necessarily professional relationships, it's even more crucial that people know how to treat you, that they know how to help you when you need help, and that you're able to get the support you deserve and need. So I always like to talk about this idea of like social workplace self-advocacy, is that when we're communicating, it lets us make these decisions, and especially in social situations, is sometimes it's being self-aware of what our own limits are. So I've been invited many times to go out with friends, and they would want to go places that I knew would be a sensory overload for me. And having to say that, hey, I would love to go, but this will be too overwhelming for me, was a way of saying, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for not excluding me, but this is really inaccessible. So maybe not this time, or maybe come up with a different solution so then I can go out with you guys. So that need for inclusion is really important. And also something that I think is hard for our allies to recognize is that masking and camouflaging can be potential barriers to inclusion and also self-advocacy. Is that sometimes we might forego communicating what we need because we want social acceptance, that we want to be seen as normal enough to have friends, to be included, and things like that, that we might realize we have these needs, and we might not even bother to advocate for ourselves because at least we're at the table, at least we're being accepted. But we're not really being accepted for who we are, and we're not getting the help that we need when we are trying so hard to muscle through and pass as non-disabled. That ultimately ends up hurting us, and it leaves other people confused when suddenly we have to drop out or it's just been too much. So I really wanted to point this out, especially when we're dealing with multiply marginalized, disabled, autistic, and neurodivergent people. So when we're talking about people who are marginalized by gender or by race or by culture or by sexual orientation or something else, realizing that these masking and camouflaging behaviors happen a lot more out of a necessity for survival and also acceptance and to avoid dangerous situations. But at the same time, it also means we might not speak up for ourselves because we want to be safe and we want to be accepted. And that's a really complicated dance, but it's something that I think is always worth bringing up. Again, with the workplace, we go back to requesting reasonable accommodations. That in itself could be a whole webinar. And I'm hopeful that we'll get to talk about workplace stuff down the line and all sorts of stuff that goes into that accommodation request. How do we do it? How should an employer react? I know we have employers in the room today who are probably thinking, oh my gosh, that's all stuff I would love to know more about. And also, again, really knowing how to soft disclose and how to advocate for ourselves. And going back to that I work best when script is kind of this power phrase for neurodiversity, as one of my friends with ADHD calls it. And just knowing that that helps us be able to get what we need and what we want. And sometimes self-advocacy is using those little scripts and kind of following this is what I'm good at. This is what I need help with. I need help with X. I work best when X, Y, and Z happens. Is that might be a really great way to have those conversations. They're predictable. They tell us exactly what to say and do. And it's a way that everybody feels like they're empowered, right? So if I tell you, I work best when you give me clear instructions, that tells you, okay, if I give Haley clear instructions, she's going to do a good job. Not that, oh my gosh, I need to go do this. I need to go to HR. I got to do blah, blah, blah. Okay. If I write out what she needs, or I tell her that is due on April 5th, boom, we got it. It's clear. So it makes everyone feel that they're in a position of power, and I'm able to get what I need if someone tells me it's due on this day and here's exactly what you need to do. I really like checklists for that reason. And sometimes people are nice enough to give them to me. And that brings me back to what if all of this is nerve-wracking? So it could be really kind of scary to be realizing, oh my gosh, that's a lot of talking. That's a lot of hard conversations. That's a lot of getting into something I'm not sure if I want to get into right now. And that's okay too. So when we have that, it's okay to take your time. It's okay to regroup and practice what message you want to get across. So whether you want to write out the text, draft it, or you want to practice advocating for yourself in front of the mirror. I've done that before, even just like practicing the body language in case it makes someone uncomfortable, or even just kind of figuring out what I want to do. And sometimes when I've had self advocacy or having to advocate for myself and my needs conversations, I've had talking points. I actually did this talking points thing a couple months ago because there was a leak coming from the upstairs bathroom in my apartment. So I live on a second floor, and the third floor unit was having a leak, and it was very obvious on my ceiling. And I originally went to maintenance, asked them to please help me and contact the person. Maintenance didn't do anything. So I had to contact the owner of the apartment above me and tell them that their toilet was leaking. And it was super stressful for me. And then they sent the plumber out and they cut a hole in my ceiling, which means I was freaking out thinking my life was over because there's a giant hole in my ceiling. And when I talked this out with my parents and other trusted adults, realizing that the only way they're going to fix things in an apartment building is they're going to cut a hole in your ceiling, that they gave me talking points when I went back to the owner and helped me come up with talking points of what to tell the owner of the unit above me so that she can work to patch up my ceiling because her plumbers did that. And we had this little bullet list of like things that we came up with, like be sure to thank her for sending out the plumber. Be sure to let her know that that problem was fixed, but you also have this hole in your ceiling. Maybe take a picture of it and ask her when she can send out a repairman, for instance. And that was something that really helped, is having that list of bullets, because she was a really busy lady and she wanted phone calls only. So when I called her on the phone, I was nervous because I've only spoken to her once in the 5 years that I've lived here, and I've never met her in person. And I had my talking points in front of me and I was actually crossing them off as I was having this conversation with her, thinking, okay, I thanked her for sending out the plumber. I let her know it was fixed. And now I got to do the big ask of saying, can you send somebody out because there's a hole in my ceiling, and text her the picture while she's on the phone with me. And that helped me feel really grounded in getting that message across of saying, I need not to have a hole in my ceiling. Is how do I say that in a way that I'm able to get what I want? A repairman. Make her feel like she's able to do that, which she was, and also be acting in a way that was socially appropriate for that kind of conversation, and not really showing that I was super nervous and super scared and thinking, oh my gosh, what if this doesn't happen? Am I going to have to like initiate a dispute or something, or get my own maintenance man and I don't know what to do? So I tell this story just to kind of reiterate that I've never really done the talking points thing for self-advocacy, but that was the first time I really did it. And it made me so much less nervous because I knew exactly what I had to say and what was really important that I was able to say, depending on how she responded as well. And we got everything fixed right away. It was super painless once it was over, but it was something that was really empowering for me, realizing, hey, I have different tools at my disposal that I can use to get what I need, and to make sure that my house is clean and safe and doesn't have a funky hole in my ceiling. Which brings us to kind of back to this idea of large scale self advocacy is something really powerful that we could do. And I think this is great for all of us because, again, like we all said, we're all self advocates, right? It's not just autistic people, it's not just disabled people. Is that this is a collective movement. We talked about how it's a personal and political philosophy when we first got started today, and that we're really laboring towards acceptance, inclusion, equality, and equity, and belonging. So we don't always have to have these conversations, that people are ready to help us without making us feel like we are an add-on or not being included in our own decisions. Sometimes it's important for self-advocates, and when we do especially get older and more independent, that we have some kind of working knowledge of law and policy, so knowing what rights we have. Or sometimes advocates like myself might end up becoming educators, that we end up educating others on neurodiversity, our disabilities, and sharing our stories in order to bring a change. So bringing change is something I always grew up with is a really important thing. And even just being able to share my personal story is something I do in the context of a larger picture. So I'll tell you guys stories from my life in order to help illustrate, hey, we can do this for self-advocacy. Or hey, don't think of just one version of an autistic success story or something like that. So that all sorts of major policies and things that happen in the news, whether it's home and community-based services or eliminating sub-minimum wage, whatever rights and policies that affects us every single day. And of course, what we're using when we use self-advocacy skills is that we're ensuring that our people have a seat at any decision-making table. So I know for me, I serve on several nonprofit boards, and part of my job is also being very vocal and making sure that I'm not the only autistic person in the room. And I will sit there at some of these meetings and say, hey, we should have another board member on the spectrum. And sometimes they'll actually listen and bring in more people on the spectrum. And it's really wonderful to see. So making sure that we are key decision makers in our lives and in things that affect not just us, but other people like us is really, really powerful and really, really important. So I think it's also important that we can use these skills in practice. So this community is full of advocacy opportunities and self-advocacy opportunities. So our community and the disability community. So again, we can use all sorts of skills, whether it's with our service providers, realizing we're not getting what we need or what we want, or if they're making us uncomfortable with something we don't like, agree with them doing to us or for us, our policymakers, our schools, and our teachers. And of course, we can also learn from other people with disabilities. So something that to me is super interesting is the way that we self-advocate with each other. So I have different access needs than some of my autistic friends do, and we have to learn from each other, and we learn how to advocate together. We learn how to advocate for ourselves and one another, and it's really awesome to see. And a lot of the things that I learn, including, hey, when you don't know what to do and you need backup, you can do this, or signal to the other adult with you that you need help. That, I'm saying that thinking that's genius. And a lot of this I learned from other autistic adults and other people with disabilities. So please be sure to seek out their wisdom as well. Don't just rely on me. As much as I love what I do and as much as I love getting to talk about these topics with all of you today, I am not the only person talking about self-advocacy skills or self-determination or independence. And I think it's really important that we talk to as many humans as possible to really learn and get the entire spectrum of experiences, because it looks very different for people who are from different backgrounds than me, who have other identities that I don't, or just people who might be of a different generation than I am. So please continue your learning in this field with other autistic self-advocates, with other disability self-advocates, or other people that you just know certain strategies might have worked for their families or their students as well. So learning, as one of my favorite educators and influencers, Blair Amani, says, learning is a blessing, and it's something we can continue to do each and every day. And I hope that it's something that we continue onward with as time goes on as well. So thank you so much for listening to my feelings and thoughts about self-advocacy. I'm sure that we have some questions and discussion and things we would love to get into to kind of unpack some more stuff, tell some more stories, or if you have any feelings, thoughts, you gotta go because it's past time for you, then let's do what we can. And I'm excited to keep this conversation going.
Great. Thank you so much, Haley. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but we'll give everyone a couple minutes to post any in the chat or the Q&A if you have any questions for Haley. I am going to go ahead and post the follow-up survey from this session in the chat now. So there is the link for you. Please, if you have 5 minutes out of your workday to go ahead and take that survey, we would greatly appreciate it. That same survey link will be in your follow-up email, which you will receive tomorrow, as well as the website where the recording and the PowerPoint slides are hosted. You can access that. That will also be within the website as well. Cindy Gibson, was there a sign in? I'm not sure what you mean by that, Cindy, but we have access to attendee reports and things like that. So you didn't need to sign in or anything like that. But if that did not answer your question, then please clarify for me. And then we're getting a lot of this was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. The PowerPoint was posted in the slides for those of you who are asking. I will put that again here right now, but it is located on our website as well, the autism. Here's the PowerPoint slides. I just put that in the chat, and then our website as well, the autismcollegeandcareer.com. That's where you can access everything from this session. And Haley's past session last month as well was really great. So if you weren't able to join us for her July session, then you can watch the recording there. Lots of thank yous to you, Haley.
Well,
For your
thank you everyone for coming today. I always appreciate when people are willing to give time to spend with us. And Leslie just asked what the title of my book is. So I have several books, but I have a book coming out in November called The Young Autistic Adults Independence Handbook. I'm super excited about it. There is a pre-order link on Amazon, which is still making me kind of geeky excited about it. And I am not someone who enjoys plugging products. So that's kind of my little spiel because it's not officially out in the world. I don't even have author copies yet, but I'm super excited about it. And I got to talk about everything from self-advocacy to like money skills to what do I do if I'm having a mental health crisis to how do I interact with cops. I got to talk about all sorts of different conversations that come with that. And oh, thank you, Julie, for the love about my artwork as well. I haven't actually been posting art in a very long time because life has gotten in the way. But if you want, I can, and if we have more time, I'll actually move my camera around because I actually decorated my apartment with my own work because once upon a time I was young and basically moving in and I didn't have any artwork other than stuff that I've painted. So I have all sorts of my own paintings around my house. So it's always really nice to hear that that's appreciated because I need to figure out how to incorporate more of it into my presentations as time goes on. And this is a great question. Is Lori is asking, what quick reminders can you give me to remember to teach self-advocacy to my high school students? Oh my gosh, this is such a great question because high school students and younger folks and someone has middle school students. Oh my gosh, this is all super helpful. So I like to think of self-advocacy looks very different at ages and stages. And also because everyone has different levels of understanding and cognition and interests as well, that it looks different for every single human being. So you might have folks who are in middle and high school who are still learning how to advocate for very basic needs. And then you have middle and high school students who realize that they're coming up to a transition and their parents or caregivers might not be able to do everything for them. So I think a lot of this when we talk to them, and I think what we see, especially with adolescents, is they don't want their parents doing everything. I know that's kind of a very kind of no-brainer take sometimes is that they don't want to hide behind their parents. They don't want mom and dad doing all the talking for them. So I think a lot of that is even saying or having that reminder of, okay, mom and dad are not going to do everything. And in class that may, or outside of class, or when you have your students, think about what are the type of things that the parents usually come with that are things that the students should probably be addressing themselves. I know that sounds kind of silly sometimes, like maybe they know that they need more time or that they don't understand something. Instead of like Johnny's not doing well at math, they might understand, your student might know, I'm not doing great at this. Maybe I need help, and not just mom calling you and going, hey, I need tutoring in math. Maybe it's Johnny taking that initiative and coming to office hours or something. So I think when we teach self-advocacy schools in those situations, especially as kids are getting older, and we want them to rely a little bit less on their parents or see their parents more as backup. So look at it as our self-advocate is kind of the captain of the team, and that the parents are the other people, are the other teammates, that they're not the captain of the team. And you can absolutely call them if you need help or that you need them to kind of save the ball from you because you're out with an injury or something. I don't know. I'm not really great at sports, but I think looking at the self advocate as the team captain and everyone else as the other athletes on the team, it doesn't mean that they're not necessary because it's not a one person sport. It's just that sometimes you need the team and other times you don't. And I think that's kind of my go-to when it comes to middle and high school students because they aren't quite adults and they still can very much lean on the rest of the team, but they but also kind of encouraging them to see the team more as a safety net, more than that those people are the captains of the team, if that makes sense. I'm sorry. I know that was a weird analogy in my own little brain. It made more sense in my head before I said it out loud. And Loretta asks, what do you recommend that an undiagnosed autistic 30-year-old woman do to, one, get diagnosed, and two, advocate for themselves? Okay, buckle up. We got I have feelings about diagnosis. So number one, on someone who's undiagnosed, why are we seeking a diagnosis in the first place? So I'm someone who comes from the vein that self-diagnosis or self-identification is extremely valid. I know that this is not always the most popular opinion, especially among service providers, and especially when it comes to adults. I say this because there are many barriers to a diagnosis, and those barriers include money, services, where you live, a clinician that's going to take you seriously. And I say this as a woman as well. I know how hard it is to get physicians and psychologists and psychiatrists to actually believe you. Is that you might be struggling with pain, or you might be struggling with something and they'll just say it's all in your head. I know that from growing up with family members who were and are women with chronic illnesses, that getting believed by a physician or healthcare provider is very difficult in the first place. So look at, when it comes to diagnosis, if this is, why are we seeking a formal diagnosis in the first place? Is it because we need supports, or is it because that a formal answer might bring clarity to this person's life? So I think when it comes to kids, getting a formal diagnosis is a little bit more important because it gives access to more services. But with someone who's 30, full disclosure, that's older than I am. So someone who's 30 might be needing accommodations at work and might need that history of documentation. That might be a good reason to get diagnosed. As for advocating for themselves, I think that self-diagnosis might actually be a good first step there, is realizing kind of what they're struggling with. So maybe this person is struggling with sensory inputs, with executive functioning. They might need some extra reminders on their calendar. I don't know this human being, so I can't say what they really need to advocate for themselves. But self-awareness, I think, is a really great first step for anyone who's learning how to advocate for themselves. And especially if autism is newer to them, or they're just discovering that part of their identity and what it really means, is having a self-awareness is probably the first big step, especially as folks are getting older. And I think I want to relay that back to the question of our middle schoolers and high schoolers as well. So I think really having a self-awareness is a huge part of that conversation. And Maxette wants to ask if I think that Asperger's syndrome and autism are the same thing. Actually, under DSM-5, they are. That every form of autism got rolled into this handy dandy label of autism spectrum disorders. So yes, it's all the same thing, just everybody's individual autism presentation might look a little bit different. And also, fun fact is Asperger's syndrome is an outdated term. We don't use it in diagnosis anymore. And there's also some really interesting history that has come to light in the last couple of years about Hans Asperger, who the syndrome is named after, and that he was in collaboration with Nazi Germany. There's all sorts of interesting stuff there as it relates to social justice, Holocaust history, anti-Semitism, etc. So Asperger's as a clinical term for both social justice and also clinically correct reasons has fallen out of favor. And I think that's something I didn't expect to happen, but that's something that was really interesting. So fun fact, if you wanted to learn something new. Okay, I'm trying to catch up with the chat. Am I missing anything that is probably a good idea?
I don't think so, Haley. I did want to reiterate, because we had someone ask, if you would like to request a participation certificate, you can email us and we can draft a participation certificate for you. It's icsps@ilstu.edu, and I have put that in the chat for everyone.
You are wonderful, Kirsten. Thank you.
Of course, everyone else, I think you've answered everything, Haley, and I don't see any others coming in. I just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone, and thank you so much to Haley for both of her sessions. I know they were very well attended and amazing, and we appreciate all your efforts and your work within the system. Haley, did you have any other final remarks before we close out?
Not that I can think of, but thank you all for your time and have a wonderful rest of your day. And please let me know if there's anything else that I can help with.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.